Step back to the autumn nights of the 1920s through the 1980s. The air was thick with wood smoke and the sweet, honest scent of caramel bubbling on the stove. This was Halloween before industrial candy took over. Costumes were stitched at home, and trick-or-treating meant filling a pillowcase with tokens of genuine community. Before standardized wrappers and brand-name sweets, neighbors made their own magic. They turned apples, molasses, and butter into handcrafted treasures representing a time when simple joy was made, not bought. Prepare for a nostalgic journey as we uncover 30 of these lost, homemade Halloween treats. 30 old-fashioned Halloween treats you'll never see again. Molasses taffy pull. Long before candy bars and lollipops, Halloween night was often celebrated with a taffy pull, a sticky, joyful tradition that brought families and neighbors together. Made from inexpensive ingredients like molasses, brown sugar, butter, and a touch of vinegar, the mixture was boiled until it reached the hardball stage, then poured onto a buttered slab to cool. As the mixture hardened, participants would grease their hands and pull the cooling mass into ropes, stretching and folding it until it became glossy, lighter in color, and aerated. This tradition dates back to the late 1800s, but faded dramatically after World War II, when homemade candy became less common. Today, the phrase taffy pull feels like a relic of a gentler time, when Halloween meant warmth, not wrappers. 2. Popcorn balls. These were the quintessential Depression-era Halloween treat, symbolizing affordability and resourcefulness, especially popular in Midwest farm communities in the 1930s and 40s. Unlike modern versions, these were often bound with a dark, rich, molasses-based syrup, giving them a deeper, earthier sweetness than simple corn syrup provides. The entire kitchen would smell faintly of popcorn and burnt sugar, as the hot, sticky mixture was quickly worked and shaped by hand before being individually wrapped in wax paper. They disappeared as parents grew increasingly concerned about the hygiene of unwrapped homemade treats. 3. Sweet potato candy. A resourceful southern treat, especially common in rural areas throughout the 1920s and 30s. This candy was made by boiling or baking sweet potatoes until soft, mashing them, and then combining the mash with copious amounts of powdered sugar, coconut, and occasionally a splash of vanilla. The resulting firm, fudgy mixture was often rolled into small logs or balls and dusted with more sugar. It was a humble, earthy confection that took advantage of a plentiful regional crop, and it faded because the labor-intensive process couldn't compete with the quick availability of cheap manufactured sweets. 4. Candied apple rings. Before the whole apple caramel craze, slices of tart apple, often Granny Smith, were cored and boiled down in a simple, vibrant cinnamon sugar syrup. The cooled rings were left to dry and crystallize, resulting in a chewy, intensely flavored treat with a delicate, crackling sugar coating. Popular at school carnivals and church bazaars throughout the 1950s, these were prized for their intense red color and sweet and sour complexity, but they simply lost ground to the convenience of modern bulk-bought taffy and hard candies. Number 5. Cream cheese. Stuffed dates. A slightly more sophisticated, grown-up treat, often found on Halloween party trays in suburban America during the 1950s and 60s. Large, pitted dates were gently split and filled with a mixture of softened cream cheese, usually sweetened with a little powdered sugar and vanilla, and often capped with a toasted pecan half. They symbolized a step away from purely rustic sweets toward a more cocktail party culture. Their eventual disappearance is linked to the general trend away from labor-intensive home-assembled finger foods. Number 6. Hard rock candy. Flavorless clear kind. This was the absolute simplest of the hard candies, often made by simply boiling sugar and water to a hard crack stage and allowing it to cool in sheets that were then broken into random shards or rocks. It was a common penny candy in the early 1900s and a cheap, quick offering during the lean years of the Depression. It offered pure, undiluted sweetness but lacked the vibrant flavors and coloring necessary to survive the arrival of modern confectionery science. Number 7. Peanut brittle, the homemade, grainy kind. Unlike the modern, uniformly thin brittle, homemade brittle from the 1940s and 50s, was often thicker, less airy, and prone to having a slightly grainy texture due to crystallization. It was made by mixing boiling sugar, corn syrup, water, and peanuts, and adding baking soda at the very end to create pockets of air. The glorious cracking sound as the baker broke the cooled sheet into irregular, chunky pieces was the music of the fall kitchen. This treat largely gave way to commercial brands that perfected a smooth, non-grainy texture. Number 8. Black walnut fudge. A regional variation particularly common in the Midwest and Appalachia, where black walnuts were a readily available seasonal crop. This fudge was intensely flavored, benefiting from the oily, pungent, and highly aromatic nature of the black walnuts, which give a sharper, more complex flavor than standard English walnuts or pecans. It was a hallmark of community bake sales in the 1960s, but the increasing cost and difficulty of shelling black walnuts contributed to its decline. Number 9. Spiced cider donut holes. A seasonal offering from local bakeries and farm stands, particularly in New England during the 1970s. These donut holes were either fried in bulk and then immediately rolled in a mixture of cinnamon and nutmeg lace sugar, or dipped in a cider glaze. They offered a warm, comforting contrast to the cold October air, but their freshness and regional specificity made them impossible to sustain against mass-produced commercial baked goods. Number 10. Divinity. A notoriously difficult, temperamental candy made by pouring a hot sugar syrup into stiffly beaten egg whites, a process requiring precision and perfect humidity. The resulting nougat-like candy was airy, fluffy, and typically studded with pecans. It was the mark of a skilled baker and a centerpiece of Southern holiday tables from the 1940s through the 1970s. Its delicate nature and tendency to fail in humid climates made it an early casualty of the convenience food movement. Number 11. Apple butter cookies. A simple, cakey drop cookie made by replacing most of the fat and liquid with homemade, deeply spiced apple butter. They were a frugal way to celebrate the apple harvest, common in rural Pennsylvania Dutch communities. These cookies often had a soft, chewy texture and were dusted with powdered sugar, symbolizing the thrifty ingenuity of the 1920s and 30s farm wife. Number 12. Potato candy with peanut butter. A variation of the sweet potato treat. This used plain mashed white potatoes as a binder, mixed heavily with powdered sugar to create a stiff, white dough. This dough was rolled thin, spread with a rich layer of peanut butter, and then rolled up tightly and sliced into attractive, swirling pinwheels. It was a Depression-era staple because potatoes were universally cheap, and it offered a surprising, earthy sweetness that provided a little more sustenance than pure sugar. Number 13. Hand-cut caramels, the dairy kind. These soft, buttery cubes were made with heavy cream, butter, and granulated sugar, boiled slowly until the mixture achieved a deep, rich color and a perfect, chewy but not sticky texture. They were cut into uneven, rustic squares and individually wrapped in small pieces of waxed paper, often with the ends twisted like a piece of saltwater taffy. The intense labor and high cost of dairy necessary for true caramels made them too expensive to continue as a common trick-or-treat offering. Number 14. Coconut haystacks, the toasted kind. A classic non-baked treat common during the 1960s and 70s, where melted chocolate was mixed with shredded coconut and often crushed cornflakes, then dropped by spoonfuls onto wax paper to harden. The best versions used lightly toasted coconut, lending a deeper, nuttier flavor. They were popular at school parties because they required no baking, but they vanished as parents became warier of allergen cross-contamination, especially peanuts and tree nuts. Number 15. Saltwater taffy, barrel scooped. Prior to the rise of branded, individually wrapped commercial bags, taffy was often scooped from large wooden barrels at the local general or five and dime store and sold by the pound. These candies had a less uniform texture and flavor than modern ones and were simply wrapped in clear cellophane, which sometimes stuck mercilessly to the candy. This tradition died out entirely with the rise of modern food safety and packaging standards in the late 1970s. Number 16. Gumdrop cake slices. This was a sweet, dense cake batter studded with brightly colored, chewy spice gumdrops. This dessert was a popular way to use up excess gumdrops and a favorite at church socials during the 1950s and 60s. The sugary, slightly abrasive coating on the gumdrops would melt into the cake as it baked, giving it a unique, sticky texture. The bright, jewel-toned colors of the candies offered a vibrant contrast to the autumnal brown of the spice cake. Number 17. Popcorn ball wreaths. Not just a treat, but a decoration and an offering. Large, whole popcorn balls, often tinted green or orange with food coloring, were fastened to a wire base to form a wreath that hung on the front door, offering a visible symbol of Halloween welcome. Kids were sometimes allowed to pick a ball off the wreath on their way out, connecting the front porch to the kitchen's warmth. This edible decoration symbolized the blend of community hospitality and seasonal creativity that defined the era. Number 18. Honey-sweetened bran muffins. An unexpected Halloween offering, particularly in health-conscious homes in the 1970s that were moving away from pure sugar. These were small, rustic muffins, sometimes made with whole wheat flour and sweetened only with honey or molasses. Although not a typical candy, they were a wholesome, homemade alternative given to kids who arrived early. The inclusion of bran reflected a growing counterculture interest in natural, less processed foods during that decade. Number 19. Vinegar taffy. A predecessor to the molasses version, this was a hard candy made primarily from sugar and a significant amount of apple cider vinegar. The vinegar acted as an anti-crystallization agent and gave the candy a pleasant, subtle tang that cut through the sweetness. This extremely simple old-world candy faded as corn syrup became the preferred, more reliable and neutral method for controlling sugar crystallization. Number 20. Peanut stuffed figs. Similar to the date confection, whole dried figs were used as a vessel, often stuffed with a spoonful of homemade peanut butter or a single roasted peanut. These were common during the 1930s as dried fruit offered good value, and the peanut provided an affordable source of protein. This frugal treat combined the earthy sweetness of the Mediterranean fig with a hearty American farm staple. Number 21. Homemade marshmallows, the dust-covered kind. Before the perfect cylinders of jet puffed dominated, marshmallows were made in the kitchen with gelatin, whipped sugar syrup, and vanilla. The resulting block was cut into squares and liberally dusted with cornstarch to prevent sticking. They were fluffier, richer, and melted beautifully, but the intense labor involved and the messy cornstarch dust made them impractical for mass distribution. Number 22. Sweet pickle relish cubes. A bizarre savory sweet confection that would shock modern palates. These were often served on a platter at community parties in the 1950s and 60s. Blocks of cream cheese were mixed with drained, finely chopped sweet pickle relish and sometimes gelatin, then pressed into molds and cut into squares. The sweet and sour contrast was a distinctive marker of mid-century American appetizer culture. Number 23. Hand-dipped chocolate walnuts. A simpler, non-uniform version of the chocolate confection, where whole or half walnuts were individually dipped into melted semi-sweet chocolate. The coating was often thick and uneven, sometimes with a rough-looking bloom on the surface if the chocolate wasn't perfectly tempered. The imperfect, lumpy texture of these chocolates was the proud signature of the home cook. Number 24. Butterscotch pralines. A southern-inspired treat common in the 1960s, these thin, brittle wafers were made from brown sugar, butter, and pecans or peanuts, boiled to a hard crack stage and poured into thin circles. They were intensely buttery and sticky sweet, a luxurious treat that required careful timing and attention, contrasting with the quick simplicity of later Halloween fare. Number 25. Caramelized apple slices. Unlike the candied rings, these were thicker slices of apple sautéed in butter and brown sugar, until they were tender and covered in a thick, bubbly, syrupy caramel sauce. Often served warm on small dessert plates at family gatherings, they were too messy and perishable to survive the transition to outdoor, door-to-door trick-or-treating. Number 26. Honeycomb candy. Known by different regional names like seafoam or cinder toffee, this was a brittle, aerated candy made by adding a small amount of baking soda to a boiling sugar and honey mixture. The baking soda created a rapid release of carbon dioxide, resulting in a light, crunchy, porous texture. The satisfaction of the internal structure shattering in your mouth was unique, but its fragility made it difficult to package and distribute. Number 27. Candied citron squares. A truly old-fashioned treat common in the early 1900s, using the preserved peel of the citron fruit, which was slowly boiled and simmered in sugar syrup for days until it was translucent and chewy. These were often served alongside tea, valued for their slightly bitter, musky flavor and deep history as a preserved fruit delicacy. Number 29. Cornmeal shortbread. A frugal, rustic cookie made with a portion of cornmeal instead of pure white flour, giving it a distinctive, slightly gritty texture and earthy flavor. These were often cut into shapes like pumpkins or ghosts and were common in homes during the Depression and World War II, demonstrating resourcefulness and economy. Number 30. Apple pie. The ultimate sign of a truly welcoming home was the offering of a small, handheld apple turnover or pie, a single serving of the fall harvest staple. These were typically made with fresh, locally picked apples, warm spices, and a simple crust, given out in small paper bags. The warmth and fragrance of a fresh-baked good simply couldn't compete with the shelf stability and ease of the commercial candy bar. These forgotten candies, cookies, and treats were more than just sugar. They were edible artifacts of a different time. Every piece of homemade peanut brittle or hand-wrapped caramel represented a deep commitment to craftsmanship and community. They were born of necessity during the lean times like the Depression, and flourished during the relative simplicity of the post-war decades. What we mourn is the loss of that tangible connection, the understanding that the treat you received was made in the same kitchen you were standing in, by the neighbor who knew your name. The faint scent of cinnamon and butter on the doorstep was a testament to the fact that joy was homemade, and community was built one careful, buttery bite at a time. Though the age of the molasses pull and the divinity batch is over, the spirit of resourcefulness and creative hospitality remains. Perhaps this October we can all honor those forgotten flavors by lighting a candle, firing up the stove, and making a little bit of that old-fashioned kitchen table magic again.